6 weeks after my wife told me we were going to have a baby, I found a hotel receipt folded inside the breast pocket of her winter coat. The one I was dropping off at the dry cleaner, on Dundas Street. The receipt was from a Marriott in downtown Toronto. 1 room, king bed, checked in under my cousin's name. Date: 8 weeks before my wife had sat across from me at our kitchen table and told me she was pregnant. I stood on the sidewalk outside the cleaners while a streetcar rattled past, and someone bumped my shoulder without stopping. I just stood there, holding that thin piece of paper, reading the same line, over and over, trying to find any version of reality in which this receipt was innocent. My cousin had lent her his coat. My cousin had mixed up his receipts. My cousin had some perfectly ordinary reason to book a hotel room in Toronto that somehow connected to my wife's winter jacket. I couldn't find the version. Not a single one. My aunt called me that same night. I hadn't told anyone yet. But she called, and when I answered, the first thing she said was, "I hope you're not going to do anything rash." That was when I understood that she already knew. I'm 33 years old. I work as a site supervisor for a commercial construction company based out of Hamilton, Ontario. I manage subcontractors, coordinate pours, keep projects on schedule when the weather and the supply chain and the inspectors are all doing their level best to make that impossible. It is not glamorous work. It is work that requires showing up before anyone else and leaving after everyone else and spending a lot of time on the phone, telling people things they don't want to hear in a tone that doesn't give them a reason to argue. I thought I was good at managing difficult situations. I thought I had a high threshold for what I could absorb. I was wrong. My cousin is 36. He grew up in Mississauga in the house, where my aunt believed that her son was the gravitational center of every room he entered. And she spent 25 years making sure everyone else believed it too. He works in financial services in downtown Toronto now. Bay Street adjacent, the kind of career where you wear a watch that costs more than my truck and describe it as a networking investment. He is handsome in that particular way that comes from knowing, since childhood, that people will forgive you faster if you smile first. Growing up, he was the cousin my entire extended family measured other people against. He got academic awards. He traveled through Europe the summer after university. He dated women who looked like they'd been assembled by committee to be impressive. When he walked into any family gathering, Thanksgiving, Christmas, the long weekend at my parents' cottage on Georgian Bay, every aunt in the room tracked him across the space with a kind of ambient admiration. Like compass needles all pointing the same direction. I was the cousin who showed up an hour early to carry tables from the garage. The one who drove the older relatives home so nobody had to call a cab. The one who fixed things, moved things, stayed late when everyone else had left. And the dishes weren't done. When my cousin skipped my grandfather's birthday because he had a client event, my aunt explained that his career demanded sacrifices. When I skipped a family dinner once because I had 40 workers waiting on a critical inspection, my mother said was becoming unreliable. That was the system. My cousin got grace, I got expectations. I met my wife at a mutual friend's housewarming party in Ancaster. She worked in patient services administration at a hospital, managing discharge coordination, liaising between clinical teams and families, the kind of operational role that keeps a place like that from dissolving into chaos. She was sharp and funny, and had the kind of focus that made you feel, when she was listening to you, like you were the only conversation happening in any room anywhere. I liked that about her. I had spent enough time being the person everyone half listened to, while waiting for someone more interesting to show up. We bought a semi-detached in the East End of Hamilton a few months before our wedding. Good bones, bad kitchen, a backyard big enough to matter. We locked in a fixed mortgage rate before the Bank of Canada started making everyone's life complicated, which felt in retrospect like the most competent decision either of us made in that period. My cousin gave a toast at our wedding. He called me the dependable one, in a tone that suggested dependability was something that happened to people who couldn't be anything else. Everyone laughed. My wife found my hand under the table. She told me later, when we were alone, that the speech was rude, and I had smiled through it, the same way I smiled through everything he did, and that she was tired of watching me be gracious to someone who didn't earn it. She was right. I told her, that's just how he was. She looked at me steadily for a moment and said, that shouldn't explain everything. For the first 3 years of our marriage, things were what I would call honest. Not perfect. We argued about money, about how much I worked, about whose family we spent which holidays with. She said I shut down when I was under pressure. I said she needed reassurance in a way that sometimes felt like surveillance. We were both probably right. But we were building something, and the building felt real, and that was enough. Then something shifted. It was small at first. She started keeping her phone face down on the table at dinner. She took calls outside even in February, standing in the backyard in her coat. She started a Thursday evening yoga class she'd never mentioned wanting. She bought perfume and said she'd seen it on sale. My cousin started appearing more. Not at our house, he was too considered for that. But at family dinners, he found reasons to text her directly. Coordinating a birthday gift for my mother. A restaurant recommendation she hadn't asked for. Checking in about her work schedule for a family event. Individually, nothing. Collectively, a pattern I could see from every angle, but couldn't bring myself to name. I noticed. I gave people room. The problem with giving room to people who are lying to you is that they use it to build a larger lie. My wife told me she was pregnant on a Tuesday night in October. I came home tired, smelling like concrete dust and black coffee, and she was sitting at the kitchen table with a small box in front of her. I thought she'd bought something from that bakery on James Street North that makes the butter tarts I like. I opened it and found a positive pregnancy test wrapped in tissue paper. Everything stopped. No. She started crying and I went around the table and held her and I said, "We're going to be parents," and I meant it. For 5 full minutes I forgot every single thing I had been quietly not thinking about for months. For 5 minutes I was just a man whose wife was pregnant. And whose life was about to get bigger and louder and more complicated. In all the ways I'd actually been hoping for. Then she pulled back and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Not joy. Not quite fear. Something heavier than both, something that lived underneath both, and I told myself it was hormones. It was the enormity of the moment. It was all the things people tell themselves when they don't want to see what's right in front of them. That weekend, we told both families. My parents were overjoyed. My mother cried. My father opened a bottle of rye he'd been saving for a significant occasion and declared that this qualified. My wife's parents called from Kelowna, and her mother made a sound so loud we had to hold the phone away. My cousin was at my parents' house when we made the announcement. He went very still, just for a moment. Then he raised his glass and said, "About time, cuz," and his voice was perfectly assembled. But his jaw was tight, and he did not quite meet my eyes. And I filed that away in the part of my brain that had been filling up with filed away things for months. Then I found the receipt, 3 weeks later, in a coat pocket, on Dundas Street. I did not confront her that night. I went home and cooked dinner and watched the news, and acted like someone whose understanding of his own life had not just been surgically removed. At 2 in the morning, I sat in the kitchen with a glass of water and the receipt on the table and called the hotel. I told the front desks. I was following up on a corporate billing matter. They confirmed the room was checked in, under my cousin's name, and that there had been one additional guest. They couldn't tell me who. They didn't need to. I waited 2 more days. I am not sure why. I think I needed to grieve the version of my life I'd had 72 hours ago, before I started living inside this one. I showed her the receipt on a Thursday. She was on the couch with her laptop. I set the paper on the coffee table in front of her and waited. She looked at it for a long time. She said my name. Just my name. In that particular tone people use when they are about to attempt an explanation. I said, "Don't. Just tell me what it is." She tried. She said my cousin had booked the room for a colleague. That she'd been helping him coordinate something for work. That the receipt had ended up in her coat by accident. She said, each piece of it with the careful rhythm of someone who had rehearsed it. And was discovering mid-delivery that it wasn't going to hold. "My cousin doesn't wear women's coats," I said. "He doesn't have a reason to put a hotel receipt in your jacket pocket. So I'm going to ask you once more." She set her laptop aside, very slowly, the way people handle things when they are stalling, and they know it, and they know you know it. "How long?" I asked. She covered her face with both hands. "How long?" 8 months, she said, barely audible. The room stayed exactly the same. That was the strange thing. Same furniture, same lamp, same hum from the refrigerator. Everything rearranged and nothing moved. "Is the baby mine?" She didn't answer. I asked again. She said, "I don't know." 3 words. I have thought about those 3 words every day since. Not because they were the worst thing she could say, they were. But they were the honest thing. And honesty at that point was something I hadn't expected, which made it worse in a way I still don't entirely understand. I picked up my keys. She said please. She said she was sorry. She said she'd wanted to tell me. I asked when, before or after I signed a birth certificate with the wrong name on it, and she didn't answer. Then she said, "Your aunt knew." I stopped. "My aunt?" She nodded. "About 6 weeks ago," she said. "My aunt had found out and she'd called my wife. And she'd told her not to say anything until they knew for certain." I stood in my own hallway and absorbed the geometry of that. My aunt had sat across from me at Thanksgiving dinner. Real Thanksgiving, second Monday in October, butter tarts, and a roast. and the particular smell of my mother's house in autumn. And she had known for 6 weeks. My wife and my aunt had been managing this together. The plan was that once the baby was born and I had held it, things would, as my aunt apparently put it, settle. Settle. Not resolve. Not heal. Settle. Like disturbed water finding its level. Like sediment sinking back to the bottom after someone stirred it up. I drove. I ended up parked in the lot of a Tim Hortons off the highway for over an hour, just sitting there with a large double-double. Going cold in the cup holder. Watching cars come and go. Normal people doing a normal Thursday night thing. My cousin texted me, "I heard you and your wife are going through something. If you need to talk, I'm here." I read that message until my hands stopped shaking. Then I wrote back, "You slept with my wife." The typing bubble appeared, stopped, started again. Nearly 2 full minutes. Finally, "It's not what you think." I put the phone face down on the passenger seat. I sat in that parking lot until I was calm enough to trust myself to drive. Then I drove to the edge of the lot, where the pavement ended. And there was a stretch of empty gravel behind some barriers. And I hit the steering wheel twice with the heel of my hand. Not hard enough to hurt. Hard enough to feel something that wasn't grief. Then I sat still for a minute. Then I went home, because it was my house, and there was nowhere else to go. The next morning, I called a family law paralegal, through a referral from someone I trusted. She had an office on King Street West and the calm, steady manner of someone who had sat across from people in the worst moments of their lives. And understood that what they needed was clarity, not sympathy. She told me, "Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything verbally. And if I wanted to know the truth about the pregnancy, there was a way to know it now and not after birth." I went to a walk-in clinic and asked about prenatal paternity testing. The physician referred me to a genetic lab in Oakville that handled non-invasive prenatal DNA testing. OHIP didn't cover it. I paid over $1,000 out of my own pocket, and I did not hesitate for a second. My cousin refused to submit a voluntary sample, which my paralegal told me didn't matter. The test only needed to determine whether I was the father. It would do that, his relationship to the child. Whatever percentage a first cousin shares, roughly 1/8, was a separate question the test wasn't being asked to answer. My wife agreed to the test. That surprised me. I think she was as exhausted by the uncertainty as I was, even if she had made it. I waited 11 days. My aunt called 4 times. I let every call go to voicemail. My cousin texted twice more. Once to tell me the situation was complicated. Once to tell me my wife was going through a hard time and needed my support. I screenshotted both messages and forwarded them to my paralegal. The results came on a Friday afternoon. My paralegal called and asked if I was somewhere I could talk. I was sitting in my truck in the site parking lot. I told her I was fine. The probability of paternity was 0. She kept talking, options, legal protections, communication boundaries, what the next steps looked like. I heard maybe half of it. I kept looking at that number. 0, not trace, not low, 0. I thanked her. I hung up. I drove to the far end of the lot and sat there for 10 minutes. Then I went back and ran the afternoon, because I had 38 workers on a deadline. And I had learned, a long time ago, that the work does not stop for you just because something inside you has. That night I told my wife. She cried. I didn't. I told her I wanted a divorce. She didn't argue. The anger I had expected wasn't there. Or rather it was there, but it was cold and quiet and had already started doing useful things like making decisions. My aunt's next call, I answered. She started with, "I hope we can approach this calmly." I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" She said there had been a lot to consider. She had been thinking about the baby. About the family. About her son who had made an error in judgment. An error in judgment. 8 months. An error he made conservatively, dozens of times, and that my aunt had known about for 6 weeks and chosen to keep from me. I said, "Did any of that consideration involve me at all?" She started crying. Then she said what I had been waiting for her to say. The sentence that revealed exactly where she had placed me in the order of people who mattered. There is an innocent child coming. Biology isn't the only thing that makes a family. There it was. Biology was everything when her son needed loyalty. Biology was everything at Christmas dinners and cottage weekends, and every moment when she wanted my presence and my effort and my goodwill. The minute biology became inconvenient for her son, it became negotiable. I was being invited to be a father to a child who had a father, specifically so that father could avoid facing what he'd done. I said, "I am done being the solution to your son's messes." I hung up. My uncle, my father's younger brother, who lived in Guelph, and had always been the person in the family who returned calls instead of letting them sit, reached out 2 days later. He'd heard things secondhand, he said. He didn't know the full story. He wanted to know if I was all right. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. Then he said, Your aunt has already started telling people. You walked out on a pregnant woman. I closed my eyes. Of course she had. He said, tell me what you need. I said, Sunday. My aunt had organized a family dinner, nominally hosted at my parents' house, framed as a chance to come together and talk. My mother, who still didn't know everything, had agreed. My cousin would be there. My aunt would be there. My wife had been invited, which told me everything I needed to know about whose interest the dinner was actually designed to serve. I asked my uncle to come. He said yes without hesitating. I put together a manila envelope. The table looked the same as it always did. My mother's good china, the framed photographs, in the hallway, me and my cousin, at maybe 9 and 12 years old, squinting into sun at the cottage on Georgian Bay, arms around each other the way kids are, before they understand what they're going to cost each other. The smell of a roast that had been in the oven since early afternoon. My aunt opened proceedings before I'd even taken off my coat. She said we were all hurting. She said the only way through difficult things was together. She said there was an innocent child who deserved stability. And she looked at me. When she said it, the way you look at a structural problem when you're describing a repair. I let her finish. Then I opened the envelope. I placed the hotel receipt on the table. My mother's expression shifted in a way I had never seen before, on her face, confusion becoming something harder and darker within the span of a few seconds. I placed a printed copy of my cousin's text messages beside it. My father picked it up, read the first 2 lines, and put it back down without speaking. I placed the DNA results in the center of the table. My aunt said my names. You knew, I said. 6 weeks before I did. You called my wife and told her to wait. You said once I held the baby, I would come around. That was the plan you made for my life without asking me a single question about it. My mother said very quietly, is this true? My aunt's mouth opened. Nothing came out that qualified as an answer. My cousin said, this isn't the way to do this. I looked at him for a moment. I agree. The way to do this would have been honesty. 8 months ago, or 6 months ago when your mother found out, or 2 months ago when I was making plans for a child I believed was mine. I paused. So you tell me. When was the right moment? Pick one. He looked at the table. My uncle spoke. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He deserved to know from the beginning. Whatever else you were trying to protect, he had the right to know. My aunt turned to him. You don't understand everything, Matt. I understand enough, he said. I understand that you asked a man to absorb the consequences of your son's choices without even giving him the information he needed to make that decision himself. My mother was crying. The real kind, not the strategic kind. My father sat with his hands flat on the table and said nothing. My cousin finally said that he would step up, that he would do what he needed to do, that he understood now that this was his responsibility. Good, I said. Then you don't need me to do it for you. I closed the envelope. I said, I wanted a divorce. I wanted my name kept off anything connected to this pregnancy. I wanted all communication from my wife to go through my paralegal. I wanted my cousin to stop contacting me. And I wanted everyone in that room to understand that I was not punishing the baby. I was refusing to let an innocent child be used as a reason to pretend that what happened here didn't happen. My aunt said, that child is going to need a real family. Then his real father needs to become one, I said. That isn't something I can do for him. I picked up the envelope and left. My uncle followed me out. On the front step he put a hand on my shoulder and said, I've never been prouder and more sorry in the same breath before. I saved that. The divorce took several months. My wife didn't contest much. She moved back to Kelowna for a while, came back to Hamilton, found an apartment near the hospital. My cousin eventually engaged, minimally, under legal pressure, which was marginally more than I expected and considerably less than his child deserved. My aunt sent letters, cards, one Christmas ornament from when we were children. I returned them unopened. Not as cruelty, as survival. There is a version of grief that wants to stay in conversation with the people who caused it and I had learned that giving that version of grief what it wants does not make it smaller. My mother called me a few weeks after that Sunday dinner. She said she hadn't seen what was happening in front of her and she should have. It wasn't a full accounting. But it was the first genuinely honest thing I could remember her saying about the family in a very long time. And I accepted it for what it was. My father came to my apartment about 3 months after the divorce was finalized. He looked older than he had. He stood in the doorway and said he had failed me. Not just in this, but in the long pattern of it, the years of smoothing over what my cousin did, and handing me the responsibility that should have landed on someone else. He said he thought protecting my cousin would keep the family together. He understood now that it had only taught my cousin there would always be someone else to pay for what he chose to do. I said, I believe you. His eyes lifted slightly. I said, "But I don't trust you yet." He nodded. He accepted that. It mattered that he accepted it. I moved into a smaller place in the Kirkendall neighborhood. Close to my job sites, close to a version of life that was mine, and had not been built around someone else's convenience. I started therapy. I learned how to cook meals that did not come from a box or a rotation of 3 things I'd been making since university. I went fishing with my uncle outside of Elora twice. Caught almost nothing both times, and discovered that catching nothing in good company is one of the better uses of a Saturday afternoon I've found. I started seeing someone, slowly and carefully, about a year out. The first time she asked about my family, I gave her the abbreviated version. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's not a family. That's a crisis that got put on a recurring calendar." I laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed about any of it. My cousin moved to Calgary eventually. My aunt still believes, I think, that she was making reasonable decisions under difficult circumstances. I have stopped needing her to believe otherwise. There is a version of accountability that only arrives when someone else witnesses the cost of what you did, and my aunt may never reach it. That is something she will carry. I am done carrying things that were never mine. The baby was born in the spring, a boy. My wife sent me a message, through her sister, to say he had arrived healthy, which I had asked to be told. I looked at the photo for a long time. He was small and red-faced and wrapped in a hospital blanket, and utterly innocent of everything the adults around him had done. I felt something looking at that photo. Not nothing, not hatred. Something more complicated that I don't entirely have words for yet. I hope he is told the truth when he is old enough to understand it. Not because truth is painless, but because children can feel the show a lie inside a house, long before they can name it. And growing up feeling a shape you can't name is its own particular damage. I know that because I grew up in a family that loved me. And also, without meaning to, built a system in which my cousin's comfort was the constant and my feelings were the variable. I learned to be reliable because being reliable was what the system needed. I learned to absorb because absorption was what kept the peace. I learned to give room because giving room was the thing I was praised for. The problem is that I gave room to people who used it to build a lie large enough to reshape my entire life. What I know now, at 33, in a neighborhood I have started to actually love, is that you can care about an innocent child and still decline to be used as a costume for someone else's mistakes. You can grieve a marriage without regretting its end. You can love people and still refuse to be what they need you to be, when what they need is a sacrifice that keeps the story clean for everyone except you. My aunt said I humiliated the family that Sunday. My uncle said it was the first honest meal they'd had in that house in years. I know which of those things is true. And I have stopped needing anyone else to confirm it.